and I'm pleased to be able to indicate that Mr Grimley and I will be supporting it should it even need to come to a division today. I also thank Mr Barton for the briefing he organised for MLCs and their staff earlier in the week, in which these issues were canvassed in considerable depth. Additionally, I would also like to express my gratitude to the Minister for Education, Mr Molino, and his staff for giving me the opportunity to raise these and related issues with them on a number of occasions during my time as an MP. Foremost, among the reasons for all of that appreciation is that issues of transport disadvantage are of great relevance to my constituents in Northern Victoria, and we need to work earnestly together here to tackle them. I should add they are issues that are also of great interest to me at a personal level, given my background as a youth worker in our part of the state. Access and equity should always be the priority here. Other issues raised in the chamber this morning can be mitigated, and they should be. There should be risk assessments completed, and we should be able to find a way, hopefully, that we can provide that access and equity to all. I assume most MLCs would know the general lack of bus and other transport services has long been a very serious issue in many parts of rural and regional Victoria. They certainly affect a large number of cities and towns in Northern Victoria alone, with a disproportionate effect, typically on many vulnerable people. An ability for those who require travel beyond their own towns is not only pivotal in increasing social inclusiveness, but it provides a wider set of opportunities in many different forms to both young people and adults alike. Generally speaking, the issue of transport disadvantage is at its most prevalent in small towns where services are limited and families may only have one vehicle of their own at most. There, the lack of adequate public transport can substantially inhibit people from being able to access important appointments and services, including medical appointments, education and training. In our part of the world, those educational and training providers, whether they be government, private, or in particular specialist schools, often lose the opportunity to capture and support students from towns where there is no public transport available. Similarly, although I think most people in Northern Victoria prefer to shop locally where possible, the lack of transport options to travel to other or more specialist retailers in other towns can also create an alternative for people to shop online instead. Unfortunately, Northern Victorians are often affected both by inadequate infrastructure and by the relatively long distances over which we typically need to travel to reach our desired destinations. In talking about that inadequate infrastructure, I should add that those resources that we do have at our disposal are generally not used to their full capacity either. It would be of such benefit to our local communities if ways could be found to allow combined travel and to utilise bus services which are otherwise sitting idle throughout the day. Likewise, cross-coordination with the various timetables for those services that do exist across different parts of our region often isn't what you'd describe as especially user-friendly. To all of those ends, I happily support each of the points listed in Mr Barton's motion because I think they go to the heart of so many of the most important issues and questions around the provision of bus and indeed other transport services in rural and regional Victoria. Having said that, and if I may be so bold as to suggest this to him, I would encourage Mr Barton to also ensure that the interests of special needs children and their families are also part of the committee's discussions. Vulnerable children are, of course, to be considered from a safety perspective, and as I said previously, there needs to be risk assessments to mitigate any risks which may expose young, vulnerable people to the risk of any sort of I've lost what I'm saying now, sorry. Harm. Thank you, Mr Barton. I do so in the first instance on the basis of the circumstances of the wonderful Barinya School in Wangaratta in my electorate, but theirs is by no means an isolated example. However, in Barinya's case, they've tried for many years to bring children from a range of other towns to Wangaratta to attend their school and to participate in the range of specialist forms of learning they make available. Unfortunately, that's been an almost impossible task for a multitude of reasons. Foremost among those have been the fact that only transport options to get them from further afield than Wangaratta has often been a train. And that can be very difficult to be certain that some children will disembark from a train when and where they are supposed to do so. Even if there were to be some more short-term trials of some different options and solutions, this would probably represent a considerable help. That might include, for instance, the establishment of some temporary interchanges in key towns. It might also mean, I hope, that the Department of Transport might be able to implement or broker some more creative and effectively funded forms of public transport. It is my understanding that many transport companies are still charging for students to travel to school each day, even whilst they are remotely learning. So I wonder if that revenue model and the contracts could be changed in such a way that all parties benefit more fulsomely. The provisions of better and more regular transport, and especially bus services, would also likely help to lower our levels of school absenteeism in Northern Victoria. There are quite a high number of students in our part of the state who don't necessarily want to attend schools, local schools. Naturally, however, in many of those cases, their parents aren't necessarily easily able to afford their attendance, especially at private or special schools elsewhere. The absence of better or alternative options for public transport and or extra school buses is doing that young person and their family a disservice in each case, one that could be rectified if those options were available. I do readily concede, though, that none of that is easy and certainly not as cost-effective as it may sound. Indeed, many of these and related issues are particularly complex, and I know from talking to Minister Merlino and his staff that there has been, and there continues to be, a lot of thought put into resolutions. But I think it would also be wonderful if this committee could try to investigate solutions in this area also. More generally, and on behalf of my constituents, I'm extremely keen to see solutions to any, let alone all, of the various issues that form part of Mr Barton's motion. Certainly, I am sure Minister Merlino and his staff would vouch that, given the number of times I've tried to discuss about them. So whilst I acknowledge and recognise that there has been committee work undertaken on similar issues in the past, I fully endorse them being revisited, especially given that so many of the problems in this area so stubbornly persist. We urgently need to find solutions to them. So let me reiterate my support and the support of Mr Grimley for this motion. Furthermore, if it does pass, I think that we would be very happy to volunteer our services to the committee in identifying a number of relevant witnesses from rural and regional Victoria with detailed practical knowledge and expertise in this field.